of Texas presidential debate webinar event. We want to thank Randy Stufflebeam so very much for handling our webinar this evening, all the way from Illinois. Say hello there, Randy.
Well, good evening, Scott, and good evening, everyone. I really look forward to the conversations that are going to be held tonight. May God bless you all as we endeavor to expose the corruptness of the duopoly and demonstrate why it is our candidates are the best in the nation.
And just to put a plug in for Randy, you can catch his Constitutionally Correct on Facebook, and I hope you will go there. I really enjoy watching him and Gary. Sometimes they get into a pretty heated debate from time to time, and it's well worth your time on Facebook to watch. Also, this will be made available via YouTube, and I'll let Randy explain to you exactly how you can get to that and see that other than just on this broadcast. And we want to thank those who have chosen to pay the $5 to be a part of this evening and be able to ask the candidates questions via typing their responses. We're going to give the candidates each 2 minutes for them to introduce themselves, their campaigns, and tell us a little bit about themselves. And then we will start the debate questions. And I'm going to go ahead and give you candidates a little bit of a heads up. Get ready for the sanctity of life issue will be your first topic. That's your only warning shot for the rest of the evening. So be prepared. We do have a lady candidate, and as I shared with the candidates earlier, it would be a horrible event if my mother were to come up out of her grave and slap me for not allowing a lady to go first this evening by way of introductions. We want to thank Samm Tittle for her time and for being a part of this webinar event. Samm, if you would please share with us about yourself and the campaign.
Hello, everybody out there. Mr. Copeland, thank you very much for extending me the courtesy. My name is Samm Tittle, and I'm here to talk about the Constitution, which is the only president of this 2020, God's perfect vision. You've got a Hispanic here. You've got a stern constitutional conservative, an advocate. We've got to go back to the rule of law. We've got to take what George Washington told us years ago. One day we would need a fellow citizen to put that Constitution back on top. It is the law of this land, and we've got a lawbreaker in there right now. No one is above the law. So with that, I'm here to present everything we've got for the United States citizens, and I hope that they'll all join us and know that there is no more two-party system. It's one party of sludge. We're going to be that double-edged sword that cuts right through that mud, and we're going to bring them the Constitution, what these people have been craving for a long, long time. No more lesser of two evils. You get to just choose good or good, the Constitution. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Samm, very much for your intro. Let's move on to Mr. Charles Kraut. I see he's fixing to join us up on the screen. So, Charles, give us your introduction and all about your campaign as well, sir.
Good evening, and thank you. I'm Charles Kraut. I'm currently in Utah on the campaign trail. I live in the state of Virginia. I'm in the Constitution Party for a dozen years, but I have been a Constitutionist all of my life. I was a political science major in college, and for the past 12 years, I have been an avid student of the Constitution. And during that time, I have spoken on more than 118 occasions all across the United States in defense of the Constitution. My research has caused me to create a reading list that I recommend people take a look at, because I have found about 75 books that are really essential if you were going to understand not only what the Constitution is all about, but what this country is all about in terms of where we're going as opposed to where we should be going. So because of my research, because of my public speaking, because of the thousands of people I have spoken to, I have been able to develop a workable plan. I mean, it's nice to throw out platitudes about we got to do this, we got to do that, But if there's no political will to do those things, then we have to find another way. I have found another way, which I hope to have an opportunity to discuss in a little bit of detail this evening.
Thank you very much, Charles. Appreciate your time and your dedication to the Constitution as well. Now let's speak with Don Grundmann from California. I'm not real sure exactly where Don is. Don, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me?
There you are. We see you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm the chairman of the Constitution Party in California. I'm also on the campaign trail, sitting in my car, going door to door for precincts, running for Congress in the 15th district out here in California against Mr. Eric Swalwell, who's a renowned anti-Second Amendment and a camera hog in his accusations against our current president. I believe that the Constitution Party overall has a historic necessity and also opportunity in this upcoming election to do things which, even if we aren't elected, don't win the presidential office per se, because of our lack of funding or for whatever reason, we can have a historical benefit to the country. We can win and have a great victory for our country by having a decisive stand on issues. The issues which I'm referring to, which I would like to carry from my campaign into the presidential arena, among many others. I'm calling for a national ban on the transgender mutilation of children, because I think we need to save our culture from the what I call the sodomy war machine. And that is a very serious threat to our culture, which is enforcing itself on our citizens and needs to be stopped. And we have an opportunity to do that. And that will be a great cultural victory, where probably more than a presidential victory would be, if we can stop that war machine from attacking our citizens and our nation and working to destroy our future. That and nationalizing the Federal Reserve, that is another vital issue to our country, to take back our banking system from what I call the plantation masters and the powers that be, what I call the American mafia, in fact, of the combination of the Federal Reserve System and the IRS. And there are many other issues on my website of fightthepower.org with dashes between the words, fight-the-power.org, which are of vital interest to our country, inclusive of one that I have radio commercials. I'm the first person to put on radio commercials in our country, which start out by saying, did you know that Planned Parenthood has killed more than 20 million blacks in its history, according to blackgenocide.org. Those radio commercials are currently running in California. So it's an issue of race science and eugenics, which was started over 100 years ago by Planned Parenthood and continues to this second when I'm speaking. They need to be finally stopped.
Don, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you've gone past your 2 minutes, brother.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for catching me.
It's okay. All right. We have one more candidate this evening that we're blessed to have on here, and that is Mr. Daniel Cummings. Daniel, are you there?
Yes, I am.
There he is. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well.
Very good. Share with us who you are, where you are, and tell us about your campaign.
I am now in Utah, having moved here just recently from Wyoming. I'm in my 60th year of intensive constitutional scholarship that started at the age of 13. I dropped out of the two-party presidential system on my first vote in 1968 and have never voted for a Republican or a Democrat for president. I have voted for various third parties before the existence of the Constitution Party and a few write-ins. I'm an experienced campaigner. I have campaigned for Congress, the House of Representatives, in Wyoming in the last 4 general elections, and 4 times I have been successful in getting an adequate number of votes to keep the Wyoming Constitution Party as a recognized party under the election laws of Wyoming. During that time, we've had no need for signatures, and we have done it by personal and state and local funding, to, as far as I know, without any funding from the national party. I decided to run for president because I think the party needs direction on some issues, and I have the constitutional understanding to provide that direction. I feel like what I call my constitutional instincts, the quick analysis of issues to see consequences and unintended side effects, are as good as anybody I know. I know people who have read more of the Constitution, such as Scott Bradley comes to mind as one who seems to have read everything in our early history. But those constitutional instincts have served me well. I feel like I'm always on top of all of the major issues that we'll be talking about tonight.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Daniel. We appreciate that as well. Now I'm going to introduce a couple of other folks to you. You've obviously met Randy this evening, but also here tonight with you, you will not see her, but my lovely wife is sitting here by me. Her name is Jackie. She has questions of her own, and she'll, as we go through here, she's going to stick them over here in my face. Also, all the way from Georgia is a dear brother in the Lord, Ricardo Davis, who serves as our member of the National Executive Committee. He is our Southern Region Chair, and he also serves as the chairman of Georgia Right to Life and chairman of the Constitution Party of Georgia. So welcome, Ricardo. We're glad you're here, and I'm going to ask you, if you would, please lead us in a word of prayer.
I'll be glad to. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, then. Father, good evening. We bless your name, Lord, and we give you thanks because you've given us the opportunity, first and foremost, with your word, to read the gospel that Jesus gave, that the church has been carrying over the past 2,000 years. And that gospel was the cornerstone under which the liberties of this nation were built, and is indeed the cornerstone that we must return to if we are to preserve our liberties. So, Father, to this evening, we just ask for your blessing on this time, and that, again, give wisdom. Thank you, Father, for the state party there in Texas, for the work that they're doing and their willingness to host this event. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, my brother. It's great seeing you as always. All right, Randy, you have a way. Do you have a way of showing all four of our candidates at one time?
No, I don't. I wish I did. I can only spotlight one video at a time.
All right.
So if I bring everybody in, it's everybody or nobody.
Okay, I understand. Let me just ask a question, and we'll do this by just a straight down the list of you folks. Is there anyone on here tonight that allows for exceptions in regard to abortions? Mr. Cummings, do you have any exceptions when it comes to abortions?
As a doctor who has practiced for 41 years, I've never seen a case yet where I felt like an abortion was appropriate.
Thank you. Sam?
I'm 100% life. Where would we be without it? And
Thank
with
you.
that said, I'm looking to be president to make sure that goes through.
Don?
I'm an abolitionist. I believe that the so-called exceptions, rape, incest, life of mother, are extremely, beyond extremely rare. And also that in the instance of a rape of a lady, that when we treat a child as trash to allow abortion of that child, we essentially treat that child like the lady was treated. In order to be attacked in a rape, the attacker has to degrade the woman, to less than human in order to religiously and philosophically justify the attack, even if they don't consider it that way. That's what they're doing. So when we kill the child, we're doing the same thing to the child. So that's why I'm an abolitionist.
Thank you. Mr. Charles Kraut.
Don makes a very good point. That's been a point of concern with me for a long time. As a Christian, I am totally pro-life because life must be sacred. We cannot treat life at either end, prior to birth or close to death, as anything but sacred, and we must preserve it to the best of our ability in terms of the dignity and appropriateness and the sacred nature of each human being. My concern has always been that in the, as Don said, in the rare cases of rape and incest, we have to be concerned about the mother in terms of, is she going to actually try to raise that child who is, like her, the victim of rape or incest? For adoption, that's a different thing. But basically, yes, life is sacred and must be preserved, and abortion is wrong, and it should not be the law of the land.
Well, thank you very much. So each of you are saying the same thing then. You're each applauding that there is absolutely no reason for an abortion. Is that correct?
If I might take it a little bit further with your permission, we're going to make it for this country to get the understanding that our founding fathers got it right. Notwithstanding, Almighty God got it right. And with that said, those founding fathers knew exactly what they were doing when they wanted this United States of America to remain United States of Americans. Furthermore, and again, notwithstanding that we would have some people that would come in and assimilate. So we want to make sure that anybody watching tonight knows that without life, you would not be here. And we are going to preserve that life because that life started long before that child was knit in its mother's womb.
If I have a moment to expand on the philosophies that we're talking about, this is a very quick synopsis. I believe that more than ever in our country, there's a divisiveness in our country, but I believe it's an expression, a religious expression, as compared to overriding the political expression. And to me, it's Christianity versus its enemies. And so the Christian perspective is being attacked in the abortion question and many other fields across our culture. And that's where I feel the Constitution Party is the last party standing, per se, that has a Christian base to it. And I think we need to explicitly express that Christian base and promote it. And promoting that base is not because we're a Christian nation is the reason that Buddhists and everybody else under the sun can worship in our nation. But when we lose that Christian basis, everyone else, their ability to worship in however they wish will be harmed. And essentially our nation is going to hell in a handbasket when we lose those Christian foundations. So I believe it's extremely important for the Constitution Party to take an outright stand as a Christian party.
Okay, I'll give, if somebody else wants to expound on that, I will give you that same amount of time.
One last point, if I may. The Constitution does not stand on itself. It is not the basis of our laws. Our Judeo-Christian ethic is the basis of our laws, and that's a concept that has been lost. It's not taught in the public schools. We are not governed by the Constitution. We are meant to be self-governing because of our morality, our decency, our integrity, and our belief in our responsible citizenship and our desire to support the lawful government of the land. So this foundation is critical. And the point that I'm making here is that it is not the business of any level of government in the United States to even take on the abortion issue. but it must be a personal decision governed by a person's religious beliefs.
May I have a moment? Dan Cummings, may I have a moment, please?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Although the Constitution provides no authority for federal involvement in criminal law, including homicide, that is very much a purview of all of the states. It is highly appropriate for the states to have criminal laws, including various homicide laws, and abortion is a type of homicide. It does fall within the jurisdiction of the states to restrict it and penalize it. And we as a party, and I as a president, will do all in my power to set the tone and the constitutional spirit that will maximize the authority of our states to deal with abortion. It is not a personal issue. There is a victim there in every abortion. Only half of the people who come out of abortuaries come out alive. That's a very simple fact. Abortion is a type of homicide. It is appropriate legislation for the states. And in one case for the federal government, that is in the District of Columbia, where Congress has the exclusive power for criminal law, Congress should deal with abortion in the district and have favorable legal environment for the states to deal with it on an individual basis.
If I may rebut, I agree with that. I misspoke when I said that it should not be dealt with at any level. However, I look at Nevada with its laws on prostitution, and if we had state-by-state abortion laws, we would have people running from one state to another to get an abortion, then coming back home, which is a problem in and of itself, but it's beyond the scope of what was just said. So yeah, that's fine. You're correct.
That's what the 10th Amendment set up.
Mm-hmm.
Our state laws might differ radically, but we must deal with that. We must accept that under the 10th Amendment as part of our constitutional government.
So
I'd like to readdress.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd like to
Mr. Grundmann.
readdress one particular question that we're dealing with legal. We're discussing legal issues, but above and beyond that, we have a cultural foundation. And for instance, as Dr. Cummings rightly said, there's also always a homicide involved. But I believe there are two deaths involved in an abortion. One is the physical death of the child, and two is the soul death of the lady involved. And I believe this is a spiritual warfare conducted by the enemies of our nation to destroy our nation in its soul, both singularly and collectively. And that's where we need to, the Constitution Party can address issues, not only with the Constitution as a legal document, but we're a cultural institution. And we can take a stand in that as a cultural institution to be the last standing political party that will fight abortion when everybody else falls under the bus or is thrown under by the abortion industry. And I'd like to say that one of those things that we can deal with as a party is the cultural question of eugenics by Planned Parenthood. I was recently endorsed by Pastor Walter Hoy, who is the founder of Issues for Life, and he's actually on my radio commercial, which I'm running in California, to deal with the issues of abortion, the cultural issues where the Black community is being shattered by the actions of Planned Parenthood, abortion, and many other ways of this social engineering attack to shatter the Black community. So I believe we need to act also as a party, as a cultural institution, to stand for Christian morality and to stand and bring that morality to all the communities of our nation, inclusive of Blacks and everybody else under the sun.
All right. One of our panelists, Ricardo Davis, would like to ask a question.
Well, thank you, Scott. And again, thanks everyone for joining and participating in the debate. Now, of course, this issue is near and dear to my heart. It's one of the reasons why I serve as president of Georgia Right to Life. We've had a number of perspectives here, And I'd like to kind of dig a little deeper with regard to the issues. So one thing was brought up with regard to what could be done at a governmental level with regard to prohibiting abortion. So I would like for each one of the panelists that are speaking here, what does the Constitution allow them to do as president to address the issue within their constitutional scope and authority?
Sam, you want to take that one?
I'm at your beckoning, Mr. Copeland. Go ahead when you're ready.
Go ahead, Sam, if you want to answer that.
I'm going to tell you that time is of the essence, and we have got to win the election 2020. And I'm going to let you gentlemen know that I'm coming to you as boldly as I can, because we don't have any more time. We got a baby coming in about 9 months, and that baby's name is Constitution. And we're going to bring that baby into this nation all over again in a born again kind of way. So we're going to go to Ricardo Davis's concern, and then I'm going to take the other gentlemen at their wisdom. But I'm going to tell you right now, I'm asking to be president of the United States of America, and I don't go too often into a personal issue because everyone has their own issue, and we're asking the government to step over their threshold in their concerns, in their financial aspects, and whatever they've got to do in their upbringing. I am 100% pro-life. Without it, we have no more country. So as the president of the United States of America, it is our job to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And those are not just words. We have got to now look at this in a wholehearted way of bringing our entire nation together, starting with our Constitution Party. And I love you gentlemen so much because you've been at this a long time. And I've wondered, as long as I've been traveling, and I've been in Albuquerque, Texas, I can name them all. I'm in Utah right now, headed for Idaho. And then I'm going into California to see Mr. Daniel Cummings and ask him if he'll be my mentor, because he's got a lot of experience. But I'm going to tell you right now, gentlemen, we're going to let the Constitution win for God's 2020 vision this time. And we should be looking at other aspects of this country's needs. So with that said, we as a president, we have got to keep in mind that we're going to carry on what the founding fathers always wanted, and that was posterity. Because there is a law, gentlemen, against abortion in this United States of America. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sam. Mr. Daniel Cummings, you want to address the question from Ricardo Davis?
Yes, definitely. There is less constitutional authority for the President of the United States to deal with this problem than the Congress. In my 4 congressional campaigns, on every opportunity I had to speak on the subject, I presented the constitutional answer, which is for Congress use Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2, that states that Congress has the authority to restrict, regulate, and define the appellate jurisdiction of the federal judiciary. I promised to introduce, if I were elected, a bill that would revoke the federal judicial appellate jurisdiction in all matters of family law, including marriage, divorce, child custody, and all medical matters, including pregnancy. That would repeal the 2 most abominable Supreme Court decisions, Roe versus Wade and the same-sex marriage, and allow the state governments to do their duty to their people. That's the solution. As a president, I will call upon Congress to do that, encourage and cajole Congress to do so. But the authority there, the constitutional authority, belongs to the Congress. As president, I will simply do all that I can to impede anything to do with abortion. If Congress appropriates for Planned Parenthood, I will not sign that check. And I will do all in my power to see that I can prevent my subordinates from signing that check. The president has an independent obligation to the Constitution, separate from Congress and the courts, and I will use that to the best of my ability.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Don, you want to go next?
Sure. I would immediately cut funding for Planned Parenthood. President Trump has signed, I believe it's omnibus spending bills, which continue funding for Planned Parenthood as far as I know. And I believe they're receiving close to what they had before as far as funding. I've heard multiple
86
different
million.
accounts. But they need to be totally stripped of funding, and an executive order would be, whatever way I would do it, I would do it by executive order, or I would just refuse to sign any spending bill which had any support for Planned Parenthood at all. And also, I believe going back into being a cultural institution, the office of the presidency, and even our party, we have to flex our muscles as far as being a cultural institution. And that's where I'm running the commercials in California, calling out Planned Parenthood for being the greatest mass murderer of blacks in the history of our nation and in the history of the world, except for the religion of Islam. So I believe that we need to destroy them. And we also need to wake up the black community by exposing this across the country. If I'm fortunate enough to get the nomination of the party, I would run campaign commercials all across the country hammering Planned Parenthood for that 20 million, over 20 million deaths. So my aim would be, among many others, to destroy them completely and destroy the Democratic Party for completely supporting them. So those are fundamental things that can be done.
All right, thank you. Mr. Charles Kraut, do you have anything you want to add?
Those are all good points, and I support most of them. I'm not sure that I would want to issue an executive order. Most of the plus that have been issued are either illegal and or unconstitutional. So I'm very concerned about the president exercising authority not explicitly given to him in the Constitution. On the other hand, the idea of moral suasion and working with Congress. It isn't the president's responsibility or right necessarily to introduce bills into Congress, according to the Constitution, but it certainly is his right and authority to exercise influence in the enactment, in the proposal of pieces of legislation in which he has an interest. Planned Parenthood, absolutely. I really hate paying my taxes every year because I know that some of it is going to pay for abortions, and that's should never have happened. It must be eliminated. How it's going to be done, I don't know, but it is one of the key issues that really need to be addressed in the first 100 days of any president's presidency.
Okay. Let's move to a little bit different topic, because there's more to right to life than just the abortion issue. Some things that you might want to consider would be the involvement of cloning of humans and where your position is on such an issue. Also, one of my big pet peeves is forcing parents to have their children vaccinated, literally in some cases to death. And so I would encourage you all to look at those issues and make have your campaigns, enter those into your issues of right to life. Ricardo, did they answer to your desire?
Yes, they did.
All right, let's move on to something completely different now.
Hey, Scott.
And I'm just going to go ahead. Is that Randy?
Yeah. I don't know if you saw it or not, but there was one of our attendees that presented a kind of a question. Did you see that?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Help me out there.
Because it's not too far adrift from what it is, a social issue. So Matthew says the Trump
Well, and
administration is
I would say that it's related to the issue that we were just talking about, in that we are talking about how we actually view and treat humans under law. So
Yes.
go right ahead, Randy.
So he says the Trump administration has brought Warren Farrell on to discuss the problems addressing men and boys in this country. What is your view on these problems, and what is the role of the president in addressing them?
Charles, you want to start that one?
I am not familiar with this particular news item about Warren Farrell, but what I feel a little bit at a loss in that regard. But I am aware that because of the Great Society programs implemented by LBJ and the Congress, we have 40% of live births are to unwed mothers, and the vast majority of children growing up in quote unquote welfare families are fatherless. So that's boys who never see their father or see him very seldom. And if they do, he doesn't provide the kind of guidance and structure that they need to have a real family, which is one of the primary causes of young men in welfare situations becoming members of gangs and becoming involved in significant criminal activity. It's one of those cases where the Congress has indeed legislated immorality, because if there is a father in the home, the benefits are cut. And I have no idea if that has anything to do with what this issue this person is asking, but that's my initial take on it.
All right. Sam, you want to take a stab at this issue?
Sure, because he's right. I haven't heard too much about this Warren Farrell issue, but when we're talking about boys and men, we've got to do something to influence from the very top. If you want to call it a bully pulpit, okay. But we've got to show them that, one, there's no one above the law. Two, we live by the Constitution. Three, it would behoove us to get as many of our responsible men taught so they could teach these younger boys and that will become men what the rules are, what the Constitution holds for them, because everything's going to have to go back to the Constitution and God. Because if we don't put these little boys into the hands of Almighty God, they're lost, and we have nothing left for you, me, and this entire country.
Okay, before we keep going, Matthew, if you're still there, are they answering the question that you want them to hit upon?
Very good.
I have a commentary which I'd like to add.
Okay, go ahead.
This is a fantastically important issue because there's a literally billion-dollar campaign to destroy the fabric of our society, the cultural fabric, especially the Christian foundations. It's targeted against all children, but especially boys, to stop the development of boys into men. And our president is unfortunately compromised because he just recently, his now new assistant deputy director of national intelligence is a sodomite. And the plain facts are that the war against men, let me back up. There's a Christian foundation to our nation with the natural family. I was the founder and director of the National Straight Pride Coalition. I am, and we had the first straight pride convention in the history of the nation in Modesto, California last year, where we celebrated all the things which make life a celebration of life: masculinity, femininity, and natural family, Christianity, Western civilization. But the sodomite movement, which is the enemy of our country, is working to destroy men and boys, and that comes through the movement of transgenderism, to mutilate children and to teach them what's called gender fluidity too, which is two pathological concepts which are dedicated to destroying our children. So when we talk about men and boys, we need to stop these attacks, expose this evil, outright evil, and especially just stop the overall sodomite attack against our country.
All right, thank you.
May I have a moment?
Yes, sir, Mr. Cummings. I was fixing to ask you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The constitutional issue here is whether the federal government should even be involved in welfare. My view is that there's no constitutional authority for federal aid to the states in this welfare situation. We should cut it off. Our goal is smaller government, less budget, less debt. This is a good place to cut. I will veto any appropriation that has anything to do with this kind of welfare. The states, then being starved for funds, I expect will usually wise up and I think much less freely subsidize this illegitimate parenthood problem that is a critical social problem. I will use the bully pulpit of the presidency to favor families, natural marriage, natural genders. But the key constitutional issue here is that the welfare should stop. There's no constitutional authority for it. The federal part of welfare should stop. This is a good place for me to say one of my favorite brief analyses. This is a good reflection of how the federal government's treasury, the United States Treasury, in my opinion, is Satan's largest slush fund in the world. And it's well illustrated here by our subsidizing illegitimate parentage, the gender fluidity, and all of this. And we want to cut off this fund from Satan.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Now we're going to move into
Scott,
a complete. Yeah.
If I may just take a moment, because kind of what has just happened here, Matthew asked a question that our candidates were not necessarily prepared to answer, nor did they probably have the information handily. I will say that he provided a web link that is whitehouseboysmen.org. The reason I like this, and he says, yeah, I admit that it was probably an ambush a little bit, but you know what? These guys, our presidential candidates, as well as all of us, get ambushed from time to time when we are asked questions that we really may not have any knowledge of or expertise on. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate the candidates' candor in responding to it. I think it far more represents a better way of dealing with questions that they don't have necessarily the expertise on. But I tell you, it's a whole lot better the way our candidates have handled this opportunity to answer a question than any of the major party candidates have done so far. Congratulations to you all.
Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to move on to a completely different subject matter. I want to discuss an issue that our party champions over and above the duopoly. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a heads up. It deals with these so-called trade agreements that the United States makes with multiple countries or a single country. And I want to know what your positions are on this subject matter of dealing with trade and other countries. I'm just going to say it like that. I don't care if it's a super trade pact deal or if it's just with a single country. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on it. Don, would you like to, Don Grundmann, would you like to answer that first?
Sure. The NAFTA, there's so many things to say about it. NAFTA is an example, was a disaster for our nation, but it was a disaster in the sense that we're farming out jobs from our nation to other nations, searching for, we could chase the almighty dollar down to outer Mongolia where we would have the cheapest factories. And the ultimate result is that we destroy the workers in our own nation. The recent trade agreement revitalized NAFTA that President Trump has signed. From my understanding, it's really doesn't do anything greater for us than NAFTA did before, which is a terrible deal in itself. So, and going back in history of our nation, we at one time in the late 1800s, we had tariffs on our products coming into our nation. We actually had at that time more than enough money that the government knew what to do with. They had to spend money at the end of the fiscal year just to bring the surplus down to zero. I bring that up as far as the trade agreements, the imbalance of trade and trade agreements, the lack of tariffs had led to alternate sources. That was one of the reasons for the establishment of the Federal Reserve. And that's a parasite organization, what I call the American mafia on our economy. So the trade agreements have massive ramifications for all of our citizens. And I would say we have to, as a basic principle, we have to go back to a tariff-based economy. I'm for actually nationalizing the Federal Reserve and eliminating the income tax. So we have to go way back away from where we are now. And I don't believe that that can be routed around to where it won't harm the prosperity of our economy. We were prosperous before, we can be prosperous again, but we don't have to shred the jobs of the United States, which we were doing previously in previous trade agreements, in which all trade agreements have almost a automatic job loss to them, and we need to stop all that.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I muted myself. Sam, would you like to address that issue next?
Sure would. As I've been traveling around this country, I'm looking at not an isolationist point of view. And you gentlemen might be surprised to know that Donald John Trump got his America First from Sam, although we have presidents in the past that have thought that way. But philosophical, Sam believes America first, American jobs first, American families first, America first, last, and always. I'm for putting those farmers back to work. 20% of our farmers are now filing for bankruptcy. I'm going around these towns and they're looking like ghost towns. The manufacturing should be back here. I want this industry to come back to us. And as far as trading, we ought to be able to do that, but I'm going to handle it in Spanish, porque puedo comunicar con los presidentes, and I'll do it in French, and I'll do it in Spanish and Portuguese if I have to. But it is going to be the American people getting back to work, because that's what we do. We're business. That's the best we can do. And if we don't pull it back together and we keep sending it out over shores, we're killing our own homeland. So I'm looking, first of all, to make this country first in production. So I'm really on that those trade deals. Sure, we can have them, but let's talk about our trade here in the United States of America first. We'll put them in, put them to work. All right.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Cummings, would you like to share your position on this?
I'm unfavorable toward all of the recent trade agreements, mainly because they're unbalanced in favor of other countries. I'm basically a libertarian free trader, but we don't need thousands and thousands of pages of government regulations to achieve free trade. We need to get out of the agreements and see what happens in the natural marketplace. Tariffs will not finance the proper constitutional functions of our nation today in the face of our needs for national defense. I favor the abolition of the income tax, but when we achieve that, there will be a need to replace it a little bit with some consumer taxes. But we will not be able to operate as we did in the late 18th century on tariffs as long as we live in a nuclear world and require nuclear defense.
All right. Thank you very much. Last but not least, of course, Mr. Grundmann, would you like to present your case on this issue?
You missed me.
Yes.
Oh, I'm
but-
sorry, Charles. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Charles. I checked the wrong name. Go ahead.
I read an interesting statistic about 2 or 3 years ago that the manufacturing output of the United States was the highest in its entire history. So there's something of a myth to this decline in American manufacturing. Now, I don't know where all those factories are, but they do exist and they're producing a huge amount of output. But what you probably are aware of is that President Trump's tax cut for corporations was probably the best thing he's done, because that was a next step in bringing manufacturing jobs and other jobs back to the United States. The United States was not competitive in corporate taxes, which is why so many corporations had moved offshore to other countries and so on and so forth. That's bringing that back. That's why we have the unemployment rates. So we're not a mercantilistic society. We don't rely upon protective tariffs. We're not trying to protect American industry. We should not have, in my humble opinion, trade agreements, because they should be unnecessary. I wish that we could canonize George Washington's farewell address as part of the canon of the Constitution, because he was absolutely right in the way in which we should conduct our relations with foreign nations. And they should be on a commercial basis. They should be done appropriately and properly, fairly, equitably. If one person has product A and one person has product B and they want to trade with each other, they should certainly be allowed to do so. We need to keep tariffs and such separate from the need for raising taxes to pay off our national debt and to reduce our deficit and to meet the needs of our federal government, because that is a completely separate issue. So should we have trade agreements? Probably not. Do we have bad trade agreements in place? Yes, we do. Should we eliminate them? Probably. That's my take on it.
You know, I want to quickly, Mr. Copeland, with all due respect, we only have a few short seconds. I want to ask Mr. Kraut a question. Before we go for this time, and we're coming new to this Constitution debate, I am, when he says, I want to understand him, when he says that the unemployment is down, I must be listening to the people out there mistakenly, because, Charles, I'm hearing that they had full-time jobs. They were cut down to half part-time jobs. They had to go get a second job and maybe a second and a half. And so when I hear that unemployment is down, that is a myth, a fallacy. It is a flat out lie. And we can't do that to the American people. We got to bring back this work back into this nation and stop playing. And that's the tax hike you talked about. That was to give those multi-billionaires by December 31st. He worked it just timely so that he could pay that money into those money. So all of you know that Jeff Bezos made 91 billion, 18 billion profit. He paid 0 in income tax and he got a tax refund. I'm not for that. So this might not be the time to debate, because we're coming to maybe a period of time where we're ending this thing. I don't know. But I'm going to tell you something. When you get under my skin a little bit like that, I'm a citizen of the United States of America. I'm a voter, and I don't think I could vote for anything like that. So trade deals, let's take a look. The answer for that right now is no. We got to look at American people right now. The American that's in this country is a taxpayer, and we're going to go to that soon.
I think we all came out against the trade agreements.
Right, we did.
All 4 of us, I think, were clear on that.
That's right. That's right.
May I respond to that just briefly? Those are 2 entirely separate issues. Unemployment is the need for a second and third income in a family is a result of the action of the Federal Reserve. It has nothing to do with our trade agreements.
It has to do with less purchasing power on a dollar. And we better get this right, Charles, because I like you very much. I love the fact that you're in the Constitution, but I'm going to tell you, I said it before and I'm going to say it again. It's going to get pretty tough when we come on in here. We're going to get this American public. I went out on a poll today and I took a 50-0. 50 want Donald Trump out of the office, and 50 want him out. They want him out, okay? and the portion was, Sam, you're in. They want any other person, any other alternative than him. He's got to go. And so, you know, we could get to debating this. The purchase power on that dollar is down, Charles, and the jobs that they're having to take 2.5 jobs, we're killing our people. And let me tell you something, fellas. I want to show this. See this little box? See this little bottle? A lady that gets $300 a month for her Social Security saved this for the Samm 2020 to get us out there for diesel in the tank and the Samm train on the road and turn this country around. And so, you know, I love you, gentlemen, but we're going to have to do something different.
All right, let's move along in another direction. Since we're going to discuss taxation, let's go ahead and have a discussion about taxes. I want to know, and Mr. Don Grundmann, I'm going to let you start this.
Okay.
I want to know what y'all think of the federal taxation code in a general sense. If you want to talk specifics, that's fine. But what's the difference between the Constitution Party's view of federal taxation and that of, say, Republicans and Democrats?
Well, I'll view it that I've forgotten the wording of our platform, but I've campaigned many times on the fact, I say outright statement that there's no, and I say, first of all, I preface it, if you can prove me wrong, what I'm about to say, you can get $300,000. And what I say is there's no law which requires an American working in America to either file a tax return or pay income tax. And the income tax was instituted when the Federal Reserve Bank came in. And so it's a giant scam on our nation, which the Republicans and Democrats, they know about it, but they aren't going to do anything about it because people who do anything about it have either primary challengers or they have unfortunate accidents, lethal accidents throughout our history. And that's challenging the money powers of our nation. But basically, we have the Federal Reserve System, which I call the American Mafia, and they need to be stopped and nationalized. We have to stop issuing Federal Reserve notes, which are dead money, and issue interest-free notes, United States notes under the authority of the Treasury, which takes back the sovereign authority of the nation to issue currency from the private banking cartel of the Federal Reserve. So it's a fantastic scam, and I forget the particular phrase he used, but the laws regarding taxation, I've been involved in the freedom movement for many years, and as a truth in advertising, I have not filed or paid since '94. And that's because I'm not a person liable to file an income tax return. And many people, many others, the majority of Americans can be that way. But we've been so buffaloed by the scam of the IRS and the American Mafia. In the American Mafia, like in the Godfather movie, the IRS is the equivalent of Luca Brasi. They're the leg breakers of our country. So we need to stop this fantastic scam at its roots. And that is the money changers who control us. They control our entire nation. They own everything. We've been conquered by an army of three-piece suits. So
Okay.
no foreign army has got us, but we surrendered to the private banking cartel.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Mr. Cummings next on this issue. Mr. Cummings?
The first aspect of government taxation is that the federal government simply has too much money to play with. We should reduce the tax revenue. I favor repeal of the income tax and repeal of the 16th Amendment. The federal government should be financed by taxes on things. A nationwide, universal, low rate consumer's tax is probably the best long-range solution. I advocate repealing Congress's authority to borrow money, simply striking that clause out of the Constitution, out of Article 1, Section 8. It was important when our country was founded, the founding fathers realized the importance of establishing our national integrity, including financial integrity. But today, there is just simply no political will to stop the spending, including spending money we don't have. And if Congress ran out of money, even if we didn't solve any of the other problems, that would be a very large partial solution to all of the problems that we've talked about. I favor a full audit of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has been a very secret institution for more than 100 years. I would like a widespread, thorough, deep audit of its activities from the beginning for 100 years. And as president, if it becomes my authority to appoint such a board, I would choose ex-Congressman Ron Paul as chair of that IRS audit. The probable outcome of that should be a very rapid weaning away from the IRS.
All right.
I don't know what no interest treasury bonds are that Mr. Grundmann is talking about. They sound suspiciously to me like the greenbacks of the Civil War, which were a financial catastrophe. I don't know whether I trust the federal government in the money system at all.
Okay. Thank you very much. Charles, you got a position on this issue of federal taxation?
I do. This is more toward my area of expertise. I'm just finishing my 40th year as a financial advisor, and my work and my research in that field has taken me to 54 countries around the world. And in many cases, I have met with executives of national banks like the National Bank of France. I've visited with famous money managers like John Templeton and Mark Mobius in Hong Kong. I've been engaged in this, and I visited communist and former communist countries in my research. Basically, taxation and money are very closely related, and they simply do not lend themselves to a 2-minute soundbite. It is true that 1913 is, in many people's minds, and including mine, the 1913 was probably the worst year in American history, because we got the Federal Reserve Act, we got the 16th and the 17th Amendments all in the same year, all of which have been disastrous. Taxation, now, it's going to become less of a problem once we have a Democrat in the White House, because they are going to fully endorse modern monetary theory. You know anything about John Maynard Keynes? He got the ball rolling here, and Paul Krugman, who is another Nobel Prize-winning economist, is a big fan of this. Modern monetary theory builds upon what Dick Cheney once said about how deficits don't matter. So under modern monetary theory, we're going to just be able to spend like there's no tomorrow, because the Federal Reserve is just going to keep cranking up the printing presses, thinking that there is no tomorrow, that no one will ever actually call in those promises, and every dollar is a promise to pay. So very sophisticated problem. What we do with taxation is almost, but not quite irrelevant. Certainly we should never run a deficit except in time of war, and only a valid and legitimate war. This does not lend itself to a 2-minute soundbite.
Okay. Ricardo Davis, I'm going to let you ask a question right now. And Samm Tittle, you're going to be up for the answer.
All right then. Well, thank you, Scott. Let's do this. And I'm going to just pick an item from the party's platform and let you all comment on that particular topic. My background is in healthcare. My firm does information systems consulting for healthcare organizations. So I'm going to go ahead. That's an easy one for me. Healthcare and the government. So again, what is your position with regard to what the federal government's involvement in healthcare should be? So that's the first part. And then the second part, if you are elected president, what would you be able to do to start moving the federal government in that direction?
when I become president of the United States of America, Mr. Davis, we're going to take a look at that Obama law that has on page 58 and 59. Let's start there, where we're going to give everyone their health care. And then moving on to 59, if we're not able to, or a taxpayer is not able to buy their own insurance, the government has given themselves the authority to transfer dollars out of that healthcare law. Now, I had to read 2,700 pages while the Democrat Party was in the back room doing whatever they were doing without the Republicans' input. We saw that in this last stage. We don't have more than 2 minutes to go through that, but let's take it down to page 159 and 161, where in the healthcare law, right now we're giving it to a culture of people that call it diminitude. It's gambling. So they're not going to pay for their healthcare insurance, and they're going to get it anyway at the taxpayer's account, taxpayer's expense, beg your pardon. And there's going to be taxpayers that aren't going to get health care. So we're going to take a look at that law, and we're going to say to everyone that everyone should have health care. As for the government, those people have got to understand that we are taxpayers. Somebody's got to pay for that health care. I didn't get it growing up from somebody else. I had to get it from mama with vinegar on my forehead if I had a headache. So we're going to go back as a government, as a constitution, because it doesn't provide that everybody should be buying into that healthcare law, because that's what's going on. So we'll take a look at it. We don't have more than that 2 minutes. So what should the government do was your question. We've got to take a look at that law, and we're going to have to change some of it, and we're going to have to look at it. But the people that don't deserve to be collecting on it are out.
All right. Charles, I'll ask you or let you answer that secondly.
Okay. I recently had the opportunity to help out a friend of mine who is an attorney, and one of his major fields of endeavor is bankruptcy. And he told me something that has not made the news for some strange reason, and that is that Obamacare has bankrupted and is today bankrupting tens of thousands of American families. Why? Because there were three great lies in bringing the law to pass in the first place. And since it's in action, the premiums have tripled. Most of the players, the insurance companies, have pulled out of the various states because even with higher premiums, they cannot afford to do business there. And not only have the premiums gone up, doubled and tripled, but the deductibles have gone up as well. So now people who are in the Obamacare program are paying far more than they can afford for the insurance, but they cannot afford to use it because of the deductibles. So basically, just left to its own devices, Obamacare is going to completely fail. It's going to just self-destruct and implode all by itself. We really don't want that to happen. We've got to go back to a private system. Part of the cost of Medicare and Obamacare and such is wasted either through theft or bureaucratic mishaps or just plain administrative costs. I've seen doctors who have 3 doctors and a nurse in the office and 10 employees who are clerks who do the paperwork. That's one of the reasons why the costs of medical care are so high in this country. No, the federal government has absolutely no right to get involved in medical care. I don't see it anywhere in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States. Getting us out of it is a different story, because is there any political will to do it, even among the Republicans? Probably not, until, of course, it implodes all by itself, which I think it will. In the meantime, as president, certainly I would use every effort I possibly could to convince Congress to repeal and replace, or to do something which will, and not even replace, just plain outright repeal, which of course cannot be done and leave the entire nation in the lurch. So anything that is done is going to have to be done gradually at this point, just like getting out of the welfare system, which we absolutely must do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Charles, for that. I appreciate it. Don Grundmann, let's hear from California next.
I would concur with what Charles has mentioned in many ways, and because we're so deeply tied into it, to cut everything off would blow a gasket in the whole country. And so we need to extricate ourselves from the healthcare situation slowly but steadily. Two things, though. I would use the office of the presidency and the Constitution Party nomination as a bully pulpit to spread. I'm a doctor of chiropractic by profession, and I believe our medical costs are not only come, unfortunately, a great deal by the bureaucracy, which Charles mentions, but also that we can save a lot of costs and improve the quality of life of many people by what's called natural healing and other methods, such instead of traditional medical pharmaceutical approach to many drug approach to many conditions. So I would use some of the bully pulpit to educate the citizens on that. And I would also go back to say that the continually depreciation of our currency, which we've touched on, will continually lead to higher healthcare costs, higher costs for everything under the sun, you name it. And until we solve the depreciating currency problem by dealing with the Federal Reserve System, we're just going to have, we're going to try to patch the holes in the dike as we'll run out of fingers.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Cummings, would you like to speak to this issue next?
Yes, I would. The medical situation in the United States is ugly. It cannot continue for reasons well spoken by others already, but I don't see where to cut back gradually. I would like to eliminate Obamacare immediately, but there are lots of other federal programs that should go. The federal government has no legitimate constitutional place in the medical field. That's not in Article 1, Section 8. It's not anywhere else in the Constitution. Things have gone downhill ever since Medicare started. I'm old enough that I have opposed Medicare from the beginning. I have opposed Medicare since it was called King Anderson. The younger people might not even remember that term. I've opposed each of its expansions to the disabled, to kidney disease, to pharmaceuticals, et cetera, et cetera. Each expansion has made things worse. It's time to institute a war of attrition against the federal government in medicine. It has no place except, in my opinion, providing medical care for the military and perhaps guarding our borders somewhat from disease, inasmuch as immigration and naturalization is a very legitimate authority of the federal government. We probably should guard our borders a little bit more carefully against measles and some other diseases that could be eradicated with adequate border control. As to vaccination, there was a question about that.
Okay.
I am strongly in favor of vaccination medically, but opposed to its compulsion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Matthew has a question, and I'm going to let Mr. Daniel Cummings and then Samm Tittle answer this for him. Joe Biden frequently boasts about how he penned the Violence Against Women's Act, otherwise known as VAWA. Some people argue that the act itself is unconstitutional because it provides unequal protection to males, unequal protection to male victims of domestic violence. He wants to know what your position is.
My position is that the federal government has no place in criminal law. This is clearly an aspect of criminal law that belongs to the states. If 50 states want to pass laws against violence against women, then we can debate the issue of gender equality. The idea that all laws must be equal has some roots in the 14th Amendment that has a very clouded history and was probably never legally ratified. But that act has no place in the federal canon of law. Should never have been passed, should have been struck down as unconstitutional if our judiciary were doing its job, and should be repealed. Those are state problems.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cummings. Mrs. Tittle, what
Here we
is
go.
your take on it?
My position is equal rights for all, special privileges for none. And when you got a Mr. Joe Biden, and let's give him a little credit because he's got a lot of years in Congress, and that is totally no, it irritates me. Okay, that Violence Against Women Act, Mr. Cummings is absolutely right. The government is not in the business of looking at anything else except every constitution right that every American has. And that goes for a male or a female. So if you're going to have a Violence Against Women Act, then you might want to have a Violence Against Men Act. Because what we have here is they come up with these acts to bring us one more thing to argue about instead of looking at things that are real. Like, has anybody ever looked at the Violence Against All Women Act? Ivanka Trump just made $98 million in 2.5 years, which is unconstitutional according to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, where her father, whether she's a senior advisor or not, it's going into their foundation, has no right to take under the nobility clause 1 penny. So the Violence Against Women Act, he's right. It should have been appealed. It should have been in a judiciary. Nowhere, no place. It has no place in an argument for the top of the government. Our government has got to stay on the Constitution's rule of law, equal rights for all, special privileges for none. That's my take on it.
All right, thank you very much. Randy,
Yes, sir.
do you have a question that you would
Well-
like to ask?
Well, indeed I do. Thank you for asking, Scott. When wouldn't I have a question or something to say? Well, you know, most of you probably know that I am a retired Marine. So the fact is that I have a very important interest in who becomes the president, because the president then becomes commander-in-chief. And so my question for you is that there's a lot of different issues that could be plugged in with this. And of course, there's been some battle between Congress and the president about his use of the military and that sort of thing, which causes some highlighted issues. My question is, what do you consider is the most important issue regarding the president being the commander-in-chief of our men and women in the military?
Okay, Charles Kraut, I'll let you go first, and then Mr. Grundmann, if you'll follow him.
Having served in the United States Army for 4 years as a Cold Warrior behind the Iron Curtain, and having had access to all sorts of information that I can never discuss, I learned a lot about how the military functions and how our CIA function and so on and so forth. I must say that I am rather ashamed of many of the missions our fighting men and women are sent on these days, and wish that we were not there. One of the things that's especially grievous to me is the use of armed drones. And the National Defense Authorization Act of, I believe it was 2014, actually authorized the killing of American citizens who were suspected to be terrorists using this, any method, but especially this death from above method. If I were to be elected president, I would cease the use of armed drones against any not declared war, or they had not declared war against us. Second, war is different than it used to be. The Vietnam War gave us a real taste of it. Korea did too, but Vietnam was worse. And what we have today is even worse, because now you can be side to side with an Afghani or an Iraqi or somebody like that whom you are training, who's going to throw a hand grenade into your barracks that night. You just never know what's going to happen. And to send these troops back to repeated tours over and over and over with their lives on the line from IEDs, from ambushes, from their own trainees killing them, is just not right. We're not dealing properly with the situation. We're involved in wars we should not be involved in. The president must work with the Congress whenever possible. I've just reviewed Section 10 and Articles 10 and 50 of the U.S. Code. And they're pretty explicit about this, but as far as the president's power and the limitations on the time in which he conducts certain operations, but we may all cheer when Osama bin Laden is killed and when these other terrorists are killed, but is it really what America is all about? One of my personal platform thoughts.
Okay.
No nation. Just 5 more words. No nation should fear the United States of America.
Okay. Mr. Grundmann.
I would say the most important thing that the president can do regarding the military is to extricate ourselves from the continuous ongoing wars that we're experiencing, and to take us out, to avoid new wars. But one thing I think was very important regarding the reason why we got into some of those wars, I would call for a reopening of the 9/11 investigation. I believe that the 9/11 investigation, which was used as a pretext for war actions, was a total fraud. Essentially, the math of the 9/11 doesn't add up. You had 3 buildings fall based on 2 planes hitting buildings. And that math is just totally off. That was a giant scam, I believe, on the American people, and it needs to be exposed. When we expose that, I believe we can expose the control, the operating apparatus which brings us into wars. Well, you could call it military-industrial complex, however you want to put it. But if we can expose scams like that, and going back in history, there's precedent for 9/11 being a scam in the sense that FDR knew exactly when the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor. It was not a day, it was a day in infamy for us, because all those military personnel were sacrificed in order to get us into World War II, just as the 9/11 people were sacrificed in order to get us into military actions after that. So we need to go after what we now know as the deep state, which formulated those intelligence operations against us. It wasn't Osama bin Laden in a cave. It was something far more serious than that. And I believe as a candidate, I will call for that investigation to take place. And if I was fortunate enough to be elected, I would certainly have that investigation done.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Cummings, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, I would. I hold to the principle that the declaration of war and virtually all warlike acts belong to the Congress. The president, as commander-in-chief, means that he is the superior, the ultimate military officer. It does not mean that he makes policy. The president is to conduct wars under the direction of the Congress, that is to declare war, conclude peace, determine the purpose of the war, and give its general direction. The mission of the president then is to take that assignment, that task, and to execute it most efficiently as the supreme military officer. I would word Mr. Kraut's warning slightly differently. No nation should fear the United States unless it has definite harm intended for us. That doesn't mean that we need to strike first. It just means that we should have a peace through strength policy where most of the world does not fear us, and those who might wish us ill will fear us enough that nothing happens and that we need do nothing because we have adequate military strength.
Okay. Mrs. Tittle, would you like to respond?
Couldn't wait. on the edge of my seat. The question was, what is the most important thing for the commander-in-chief? And here you go, fellas. As President of the United States of America, I would be finding myself that I'd have to be defending the mentally ill. Semper Fi, Randall. Let me tell you what the commander-in-chief should be doing today. The commander-in-chief has the authority to get to those Veterans Administration documents, and he's looking for 4 little letters, Randall, PTSD. And he's going in there with a red flag law that he's got in the back of his endorsements. And then we're also looking at a man who just changed the Second Amendment. If I get a little fierce, it's because I'm a real die-hard American patriot who is the Second Amendment enforcer. And I'm telling you right now, I'm having real heartburn with Commander Bonespurs, who is looking at our military like they're some kind of second-rate citizen. The first thing they have to do is keep their Second Amendment intact. There's nothing wrong with having that military man come back and defend his country the same way he did when he was out there 24/7. They have to hold on to those weapons. We're not taking them away from them by getting an executive order there banning bump stocks, whether you like them or not. We're not changing an amendment, a Second Amendment, without Congress and a 2/3 vote on that. And then the most important thing there is that 24/7, when our military vets are out there in the field, worrying about their families back home without their money, they have to get a raise. I don't like spending my tax dollars and your tax dollars on Mar-a-Lago, Bedminster, Trump Tower, DC, and where else do we have out there? When he should have stayed in accordance in that White House so we could be getting these military vets paid. So with that said, the most important thing is, 1, let them hold on to their weapons. I am the Second Amendment enforcer. And number 2, let's pay the men where they need that raise, okay? And it's now, not the last 3 raises for Congress. And that pretty much covers it.
Okay. Well, thank you, candidates, very much. I'm fixing to go to Ricardo Davis, who has a question of his own.
Well, I thank you. And again, we're going to go to the party's platform. So first of all, I would like for the candidate to expound on the party's platform with regard to the issue of the family. And then, so that'd be number 1. And then number 2, speak to the challenges in our culture, whether it be no-fault divorce or whether it be the issue of sodomy. And now, since some of you all are on the campaign trail there in Utah, I just got a news item yesterday where the issue of polygamy has come up. And all these things are actually intertwined. So if you would, again, expound on what the platform has to say about family, and then, again, what you as the president can do, and for that matter, as our presidential candidate, can do to speak to the issue regarding family.
Okay. There's your questions. Mr. Cummings, would you please respond?
Thank you. I will use the bully pulpit of the presidency in all respects to favor the nuclear family, marriage of one man and one woman and their natural children. Excuse me, natural and adoptive children. Divorce matters belong to state law. I will advocate tight divorce laws. We should have minimal divorces in the United States for very strong reasons of what I call the 3 A's: adultery, abandonment, and abuse. There aren't very many other very good reasons for divorce. Again, this is not federal law. This is state law, but I can stand in favor of it and support it as part of presidential influence. There are some aspects of federal law that should be addressed. The federal tax code should stop recognizing same-sex marriage for tax purposes, should stop deductibility of medical care for same-sex affairs and abortion. There are many small little privileges in the federal canon for other non-marital, non-nuclear family benefits that should be repealed. I will veto any of those that come to me. I will ask Congress to take action and repeal those. I will use any other constitutional authority that I can to support the nuclear family, not through welfare, not through subsidies, but through influence and defunding the opposition.
Okay, thank you very much. Mrs. Tittle, would you like to address this issue?
Yes, the Constitution is the most important thing to me. It is. And what we've got to get back to is the family. The founding fathers, we have to keep going back to the foundation of this. And as George Washington told us, one day you're going to need a fellow citizen because your country's going to be morally bankrupted and corrupted, and it is today. So let me tell you, with the family, Ricardo Davis gets it right. We've got to get that family back together, or we're not going to have generations and generations and generations of posterity. Right now, we have a mess. We have a division of black and white. Thank God I don't think in black and white. Thank God I remember that we all came from dirt and the rest of us followed. And that family is major. It's important to this country and the Constitution. And I walked up to some children today in one of these McDonald's and asked them what they know about their Constitution. You'll be happy to know that the Utah children get an A+ because they're being homeschooled and they're knowing their Constitution and they know that it's got to go on. So with that said, we're talking about the family, and we're talking about, let me see, a second one real quickly was the change in culture. We better stop changing culture, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. We better hold on to what is morally and spiritually mandated by our Heavenly Father. We have got to pull the family together, and you got to pull together your neighbors, and there should be no more division in this country. And how can a president do that? The president's job is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And when you can get into a Congress and tell them, you're going to sit here for 120 days and you're going to put that message back into your state and into your counties, I believe this country would be pulled back together again, because they are craving it so badly right now that they're running back into churches. Trust me when I tell you that. So that's what we got to do, pull that family together.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grundmann, I'd like you to respond, but let me throw a little extra curve from one of our viewers, Matthew.
Sure. Okay.
He says the court ruling that mandated federal recognition of same-sex marriage being based outside of law, putting that to the side, under what purview of the Constitution is there to restrict same-sex marriage?
That's a great question. I'm unsure of that at the moment. I believe above and beyond whatever legal technicalities we can use, whether they're in or outside of the Constitution, whatever ways we can do it to stop it, those need to be explored. But above and beyond that, I believe I refer back to my idea is the Constitution Party is also a cultural institution in and of itself. We're the last political party that can stand up for natural marriage and against the sodomite war machine, which is working to destroy the family in our country. And when I say that, we can have it in our platform. There's a difference between having it in our platform and doing anything about it. We can have it on our platform, but we can be silenced. Even we can be socially engineered by our culture to shut up and not doing anything beyond the writing of words in our platform. We need to be a party of action and challenge the sodomites' attack against all things. Because this idea, when I say the sodomy war machine, they're not only behind the LGBT movement, which gay doesn't exist, there's no such thing as gay and no such thing as transgender, but the same forces are behind the abortion movement to destroy children. So it is this cultural idea of Christianity versus its Satanism/humanism opposite. And that's where the Constitution Party can take a decisive stand, an unwavering stand, and an unwavering attack mode, that we're not only going to stand and defend the Christian foundations of our culture, but we're going to be a machine to fight for them instead of just sitting on our hands and not doing anything. I
Okay.
believe that's extremely, vitally, fantastically important that we do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Kraut, don't forget Ricardo's portion of the question as well, okay?
I was about to get to that. I'm sorry to say that the party's platform on family is rather poorly worded. The very first paragraph says that no civil government may legitimately authorize or define marriage or family relations as affirmed by the 10th Amendment, delegating to the people, which is not grammatically correct, as our founders understood the family, as necessary to the general welfare. Okay, so that's just grammatically incorrect, and then it is kind of altered by what happens 2 paragraphs below, which is that no government may legitimately authorize or define marriage or family relations contrary to what God has instituted. We need to fix that. Either we have the authority under God, or we have the authority not under God, or we don't have the authority at all, but we've got to make a decision as to where we stand. To move on to the second point, about 20 years ago, I was one of several citizens of the state of New Hampshire who had been invited and who participated in a public hearing on a piece of gay being considered by the New Hampshire legislature. I was shut off from my 3 minutes after the first minute, but the gay rights lawyer was given 1 hour. And this is what has really pricked my ears about the gay rights movement. He said, and I quote, "We are not after equal treatment. The gay rights movement is all about superior treatment, preferential treatment, because homosexuality is superior to heterosexuality. We're going to prove it and we're going to win." And they did. So now our public schools are indoctrination camps for homosexuality. And I could give you stories about that. What authority does the president have to talk about this? The question goes right back to what we said. Does any level of government have the authority to conduct marriages? If not, all we have is moral suasion. That's all I have to say on that.
May I have a moment?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr.
The constitutional
Dr.
issue
Cummings.
is clear and simple. The states, all 50 of them, have ultimate authority over marriage. They can make any good or, unfortunately, bad laws they want on marriage. The federal government has no place. We can advocate that our state governments support heterosexual one man, one woman marriage, and we should do so. We should advocate that in our state parties.
Well, if I can address that point right there, because if you remember, not that long ago, a number of states, including my own here in Georgia, essentially passed legislation not defining marriage outside of the authority that God has to institute it, which is what that particular platform plank is dealing with. It's not saying whether, it's not in confliction as to whether or not a government of man has the authority to essentially legitimize or authorize or define marriage. It's just saying it can't do so outside of what the Creator has instituted. So what happened, all these states, and I would say a majority of the states across the union, had either amendments to their constitution or legislation that essentially said, we will recognize only what the Creator intended as a marriage. And then the federal government stepped in and said, we're going to twist the 14th Amendment to say that, well, no, you can't do that. So I would say, what does or what will the party do? Now, I guess I could just open this up broadly because I believe Dr. Cummings did have a point in terms of, well, yes, the federal government really doesn't have, I mean, outside of the territories, have anything to say nationally in terms of telling the states what they need to do. However, the federal government in its operation can be a voice, and that is in terms of the execution of the laws of the United States. And I believe that's what I was getting at. So what, you know, as the chief executive officer of the United States, you know, how are you going to, in your administration, recognize the natural family?
Department of Education, gone, because we are corrupting this country. Our children are losing. We are going nowhere. We have got to get, we've got to get a different way of looking at things. But right now, we've got to get that commander-in-chief to be speaking to a Congress of only 535 people to get that message back down into the ranks of all of us people, that if we keep going in the direction that we're going, there aren't going to be any people, because I can't see how. So we've got to look at the first place, the Department of Education, that is allowing this kind of thing to come in. And when I hear Pete Buttigieg talk about how that education should go into our classrooms for 4, 5, 6-year-old children, I'm beyond crazy. So with that said, I say the commander-in-chief gets back into that Congress and does her job, and talks to the ranks to send it back down into the ranks. We got to get our posterity back up again.
All right, Mr. Kraut.
Well, no, it's president has to stay within what the Constitution has to say. I agree that only the states, if the states have any authority over marriage. Problem is, the gay rights movement has been very active in making this a federal case, literally, quote unquote, and in so doing have enlisted the help of the Congress and the Supreme Court and so on. And our government loves to take on issues for which they have no authority. Having done so, what is the president going to do to reverse it? Well, he can use, again, moral suasion. He can work with the members of the Congress and try to convince them that this has to be reversed. I always come back to political will. Is there any political will to do any of this? And the answer is no. How many congressmen and senators rely on the gay block of votes to and reelected? It's too many. It has to be done a different way. And it has to be done by protecting public education. If you eliminate the Department of Education and try to return control of the schools to the local communities, which is a very good idea, it's still going to be a long process and a very difficult one to try to get back to what we used to have 50, 100 years ago in terms of what is taught in the public schools, the attitudes of the teachers, the elimination of the indoctrination, and really impressing students with a sense of their divine nature, their personal worth, their ability to learn, their desire for learning, their initiative. All of these things are things that we need to put back into the schools, but it cannot be done overnight. It cannot be done by the president says we got to do this. We cannot do things for which there is no political will. We have to find a better and a different way to do these things, and they must be done.
Okay.
Political will is term limitless, and I haven't heard that. Go ahead.
We're running down on the top of the hour, and I want to give you guys a chance to say goodbyes to this debate. But I do want to give Dr. Cummings and Mr. Grundmann an opportunity to respond to Ricardo's request of what is it that you as president can do to help reinstate the ideology of
family and cultures,
traditional marriage. Mr. Grundmann, you want to go first?
Well, I believe we've been socially engineered to never say things are wrong. That under the so-called idea of tolerance and diversity, and that applies to we end up without even realizing it. We can shut ourselves up because we actually, in reality, in order to stop these evil things, we have to call them evil for what they are, evil. And we have to come out and say that that same-sex marriage, so-called, is actually a pathology. It is not. And when I started the National Straight Pride Coalition, our motto is normal, natural, healthy, and sane. And when people ask me, are you implying that those the people who oppose you, which was the sodomite movement, are not that? My answer is yes. And so we need to take a stand as a cultural institution. The Constitution Party needs, based on its Christian foundation, to say we stand for science and sanity. There are only two genders. There aren't any more, and that's the end of the story. Oh, and sanity is that all these things which the sodomite movement is using to destroy the family, they are not sane. But we have to unequivocally say that, yes, these things are evil. They're not a matter of diversity, another opinion. But we don't tolerate cancer. Cancer is an evil. We work to overcome it, not accept it, and be equal with it and allow it to continue. We have to stop the cancer, which is of Satanism, humanism, expressed through the sodomy movement, which is one of the foundations of the collapse of our family, among many other things, via their support of Planned Parenthood. There are many other ways they're attacking our culture to destroy the family, men, women, children. All these need to be confronted, but we have to stand up as a cultural institution and say, no, this is evil, and Christianity has the answer for this, a Christian base, and we're going to stand against it no matter what. And we're not only going to stand against it, we're going to take action against it, as compared to sitting on our hands. We have to be a party of action and doers in order to solve these problems.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Dr. Cummings, you want to respond real quick?
Thank you. I, as president, will be entirely pro-family with no open tolerance for other lifestyles. I recognize these other lifestyles as pathological, abnormal. I can say that confidently as a physician, that heterosexual marriage, man-woman marriage, is normal. Other activities are abnormal and pathological. People may have some right to do what they want in the privacy, in their own private lives, but we need not recognize that publicly. We need not acknowledge that publicly. We certainly should not give it any special privileges, and we should protect the rights of individuals and businesses to reject those lifestyles. I find more frightening the non-discrimination laws that are being proposed for alternate lifestyles more than the recognition of the lifestyles themselves. The idea that I might be forced in my business to make certain accommodations for things that I would prefer to shun and ostracize. There are many, many little items scattered throughout the federal code that are favoring these lifestyles that should be meticulously gone through and repealed. It's a tedious process. It's a difficult process, as Mr. Kraut has outlined, but we need to take the stand for families and against alternative lifestyles in a peaceable but not necessarily tolerant manner.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Very quickly, just to throw in my 2 cents here, being as I'm a minister. First off, I would never perform a same-sex union marriage, or whatever terms we want to use for that. I said that.
Definitely not there.
Do what?
That is definitely not marriage.
That's right. And the other thing I'd say to it is that whenever I do a service, I always, marriage is an institution of God. It's spiritual, much more even than it is physical, even though it is physical for the man and the woman. But what I'm trying to say is that when I come to the end, I always say that I'm doing this by the authority of God and the state's law. It has absolutely nothing to do with the United States government. That's the message that has to be sent out. And I am ashamed at ministers, so-called ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ, who do not put forth the same effort that I'm stressing right now. If the clergy, the pulpits would stand up, things would be different. So we must encourage our ministers to really step up the pressure on the politicians. Having said that, we are closing up on top of the hour. I wanted to give each of you 1 minute to give a closing statement. Sam, since I let you go first, you're going to go last with this, okay? And close us out with it. And then Randy's going to have some stuff that he'd like to say real quick. So please stand by. To begin things, though, Dr. Cummings, please take 1 minute and give us your best shot.
Thank you. I'm 60 years into this. I believe that my constitutional instincts are as good as any person in the United States. I see the vision of smaller government and how it will be for our physical, mental, spiritual, and social improvement. And I know the things that must go. I know the things that the government should continue to do. And I know the place of the President of the United States in trying to achieve all of those goals.
Okay, thank you very much. And now let's go to Mr. Don Grundmann.
I believe the Constitution Party can be a cultural authority, actually one of the last cultural authorities, the last political party which will stand for Christianity and the Christian foundations of our nation. When all the other parties crumble, I believe we need to maintain our base, and not only that, maintain our base, but build upon it and fight to express it. And I believe that's a vital need that our presidential candidate can do to use our party as an example for the rest of the country, for the values we need to build upon to restore our nation and save it from the countless enemies which are attacking us now. There are countless enemies which are attacking, countless issues of great need for our country to deal with. But the philosophical base that we deal with it from, the foundation of all our actions, needs to be our Christian religious foundation. And with that, we can base our actions upon that and restore our culture and stop the collapse of our nation, both short-term and especially long-term.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we're going to go to Mr. Charles Kraut. Give us your minute, sir.
America has the potential to become the greatest nation on earth, not because of our natural resources, not because of our geography, but because of our people and because of our Constitution. The Founding Fathers were very clear that we must be a moral people of the blessings of freedom granted to us through the Constitution, but which actually come from God as established by the Declaration of Independence. For us to become worthy of American citizenship, we must become well-educated, well-informed, honest, moral, decent, responsible citizens. My entire service as presidency will focus on encouraging the American people to abandon these false practices, these false gods, to get back on the correct path under the Judeo-Christian ethic of all these things, of morality and decency and integrity and self-governance, because only then can we really become the nation which we are capable of becoming. And I hope that God will bless America.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mrs. Tittle?
All right. I want to tell everybody that this is my first debate on the Constitution Party. I've been a constitutionalist since I was 6 years old. We got to get back to the Constitution, to family, to God, to country, to we the people. I'm one of us for all of us. I'm equal rights for all, special privileges for none. I'm your Second Amendment enforcer, and we're going to get that Constitution back up as the President of the United States of America. I want to thank you all tonight for accepting me as the newest person to this Constitution run for the presidency, because I was not allowed to in 2012 and 2016. So in 2020, with God's perfect vision, we'll get back to family, God, country, posterity, we the people. And I want to thank you, because tonight I'm looking to be your next president, Samm 2020.
All right. Thank you very much, candidates. We appreciate it, and we applaud you so very much for taking 2 hours to do this. And really, you've been on here for 2.5 hours already. We would like to ask you to please stick around just a little bit longer. And we're going to ask that our attendees at this time, we want to thank you so much for participating. And we're fixing to let you guys go ahead and leave out. And Randy, before you do that, go ahead and share about 2020 and your program.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. First of all, I do want to thank all of the candidates who took their time and came to speak with us tonight and did so with decorum, with statesmanship, with principles. And I got to tell you, that puts you heads and shoulders over every single other candidate that's out there just acting like a bunch of clowns and like they have, God's answer to everything, and, do so with such, in my opinion, despicability. Scott, I want to thank you and the Texas Constitution Party, what you guys are doing down there, and for sponsoring this program. I'm honored to have been a part of doing this, providing the technical background. I'm hoping that we can get this thing better, because I would love to have had just the candidates, and see the expressions as people were answering and that sort of stuff. Hopefully we can do that in the future. But like you did say, Scott, the constitutionally correct under our Vision 2020 theme are going to be holding the continuing the presidential debates beginning March the 6th, and then for every Friday following from 7 o'clock, probably an hour and a half to 2 hours. The first one, I think I want to say, is the Commander-in-Chief debate. Each of the following days will be kind of a theme of foreign debate or foreign policy, domestic policy, social issues, and economy and that sort of thing. So we'll have a night devoted to those separate issues. And I'm real excited about having all these candidates come back and be able to be a part of that. So that will be, again, broadcast on Constitutionally Correct. It'll be Facebook Live, no cost for entry, and share that information out there and let everybody know so that we can get these candidates out there known by the people of these United States of America, so we can put I almost used never mind, I won't use the word, but put a crushing onto the duopoly. May God bless you all, and appreciate you all being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, for those attending, if you would, please go ahead and depart. we would like to speak with our candidates in a non-debate. Okay.
I just canceled the recording, and all of the attendees are now gone, and it is just us.
I wanted to share a little bit with y'all about the situation in Texas and let you know kind of where we are in the mode and with our electoral votes. Recently, the law here in Texas got changed. There's some things that I need to cover with you. One of them is that the 1% of the past governor's race is still the law. So in other words, it would take us 88,000 signatures that are valid and not challenged by Republicans and Democrats. We do not have ballot access. It would take double that number of